We'll call the City Council special meeting to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Biden? Here. Chairman? Lamore?
Here.
Felder?
Here.
Whitman? Here. Angeli?
Here.
Mayor Clark?
Here. As we get started, as we start with the Pledge of Allegiance, as we do with our meetings. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. So we have our special meeting this evening, and there's a couple items on here. Mr. Pasteur, Mr. Buds, any, I know we want to go into closed session. Any comments before so?
Your Honor, the only comment I would have is, since it's a special meeting, just to solicit public comment either before or at the end at some point during the special meeting.
Maybe we should start with that, because I think if there's public here, otherwise we'll be gone in the closed session, not knowing when we're going to get back, and we have items on the agenda. So while not on there, clerk treasurer, good now? Mm-hmm. Okay, so before we go take our council action for a closed session, we'll take any public comments. Any comments from those present here this evening? Comments? Just come to the podium, please. Name and address or jurisdiction of residency.
My name is Robert Kitson. I live at 450 Mason Run Boulevard. I'm in Mason Run 3, and I'm here because there's been no development in my subdivision since 2008, but the land is stuck being under some governing body that originally was by the original developer that says we have to build a special house on that property. I'm looking to get that taken away so I can expand my house and make my property worth a little more. But that's the problem is I talked to the building commission and they said I had to come into the working group and see if we can get city council to get rid of that part of it, which I kind of see is, from a professional standpoint, I see it's kind of difficult that we're using something that the developer's bankrupt, but we're stuck with that with our land. And now we can't develop our land at all. And like I said, no one's developed anything since 2008 there because nobody wants to develop that particular house anymore.
Thank you. I'm going to look at Mr. Pasteur or Mr. Buds. I know that there's been conversation on the properties. There's been some, I think, purchases of some land at times, but maybe an update. If we don't have it now, obviously we need to look back in to see if there is any restrictions.
Well, there are based on the city thing that we have to build a specific house, and that you can't like I live at 450 and I have 5 vacant lots on one side of me and 4 on the other.
Right.
And I wanted to buy a couple of vacant lots next to me, but I can't because if I do, I can't merge them into mine. I have to build a house on them. And then if I have to build a house, I have to build the same house that I currently have, which that doesn't benefit me.
Right. I recall as that was, like the councilman, there's probably a designer type of those, but first I'll see, Vince, your thoughts of where we go from here for resident?
No, I got Mr. Kitson's phone number to follow up with, but clearly there's very specific design standards associated with all of the Mason Run developments, and so I'm not sure exactly as a matter of practice how you go about amending it, or if that would even be contemplated by the council. So I think Mr. Green had mentioned it to me recently, but hadn't heard anything more beyond that. So,
Councilman Glenn?
Yeah, Your Honor, I this is something that we've talked about in the past, wanting to know what the disposition of the Mason Run is, considering the fact that we've got a lot of infrastructure that's already in place. We have a lot of lots that are part of that plan unit development, and we can't seem, and I don't know if the property is owned by a entity that doesn't want to develop, or we really need to know what the disposition of the ownership of the property is in order to really assess the situation.
A little bit. There are 2 separate owners for a lot of the lots. The person that owns my side of the street owns 23 lots plus the back section that's undeveloped at this point. So he has 23 lots that could be developed, but he has no desire to build anything on the property. It's currently for sale. But the problem is, from a building standpoint, most builders don't want to build somebody else's spec home. And they're stuck, like I said, based on the rules that I've read, building the exact same house that we currently have on the location, which no builder finds that cost effective. And we currently have one house that's totally vacant that's not built at all. I mean, it's built, but it's just a structure. It's totally empty inside. And the same person who owns my lots next to me doesn't want to develop that house either. So we have a shell of an empty house sitting there that nobody wants to move into.
So, Mr. Bastu has your phone number. Let's
Yeah.
do some, I'll just say research, both internally and of course with our contacts and probably the city
Appreciate
attorney, see where the status is. Is there restrictions? Is there not? How do we get past anything? And what's the avenue to have buildable lots?
No, great. Thank you.
I
Appreciate
understand.
it.
All right, thanks. Other comments from those present here this evening at this time in our special meeting? Okay. Seeing no other comments,
Your Honor,
Yes.
no other public comments. I'll move that we go into a closed executive session to discuss labor negotiations.
Second. There's a motion by Councilman Michaelangi, supported by Councilman Lamore, to go into closed executive session to discuss labor negotiations. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Vining? Yes. Lamore?
Yes.
Felder? Yes. Whitman? Yes. Michaelangeli?
Yes.
Mayor Clark?
Yes. So we'll be away.
Make a motion to go back into open session?
Second.
Councilman Moore, supported by Councilman Felder, to go back into open session. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Vining?
Yes.
Equangeli? Mayor Clark?
Yes. Mr. Pastu, we have a couple items on that for review, for information for council.
Thank you, Your Honor. First item is just a discussion regarding a fly ash agreement with DTE. Mr. Barry Leroy is going to talk a little bit about it. This has been kind of an ongoing discussion with them for about a year and a half, and so I'm going to have Mr. Leroy give kind of an overview, and I think we're ready to maybe at the next meeting to present something to council for approval.
Mayor and Council, Barry Leroy, Utility Director for the city. We were approached by DTE for upgrading their fly ash handling facility that they currently have at down in East Front. It's 3333 East Front Street. This is a screenshot of their existing facility. It's right here. They're currently in the process of upgrading their to accommodate all 4 units, their new handling facility. I just have some the utilities that are adjacent to their property just for reference. And so they're proposing to put their new facility just on the north side of a cell tower over here. They're regulated by the Department of Eagle, like we are for water and wastewater. They are required to convert their last 2 fly ash units that produce power from a wet to a dry technology. They have till 2023 to complete that. They are planning to either landfill or market their product like they have been, but I think they're leaning more towards landfilling. So they are proposing to build a new facility adjacent to their existing. The twist here is their source water for running it through their fly ash. They're proposing to use our wastewater effluent instead of potable water or even river water and treating it for their purposes. They're going to have a recirculation system, which I'll show a little diagram here in a second. They'll still, so their primary source that they're looking at is wastewater effluent, with backup systems being the potable system, and they'll have a sewer connection for any type of effluent that they have to put back into the system. And then they'll also have a fire suppression, which is required for their facility as well. This is just a diagram showing the recirculation system. The dark blue line is the primary source. It's wastewater effluent water. It would go to a holding tank and then get pumped into their, it says pug mill here, but it's their facility that they'll go through their processing and then ultimately landfill or sell it. The dashed line is the backup system that they would connect to the potable water system for handling. And then this is the recirculation part back into this holding tank. So from a discussion standpoint, they're planning on using about 150,000 gallons a day of wastewater effluent or potable water. This is a capital project for them, which means it's fully funded, and it's under construction, and it has to be done in operation by 2023. Just some operational parameters, the 5-day-a-week operation is what they're looking at, like 8 hours a day. We did seek input from our regulatory division from Eagle because we haven't had any source water requests for wastewater effluent in the past. They don't have any issue with that. As long as we're meeting our requirements, they take that and then they use their process. We also investigated whether a industrial pretreatment permit's required, an IPP permit, based on their capacity, what they're going to be using and what the characteristics that would come back to us. It's not a problem. We do plan on metering this wastewater effluent, as well as the potable and the sewage that comes from the site. Currently, we don't have a rate for wastewater effluent, but looking at the cost and for treatment, about 50 cents a unit, which is about a quarter of what the potable cost is what's being proposed in this agreement that was provided to council. And then during wet weather events, they'll have a procedure in place for using an alternative source, like the backup system may be used. So like if we're switching to a chlorine disinfection process where they're tapped in, the water's technically not fully treated yet, so they would have to go to the backup system. So, excuse me, with that, DTE's looking at, they've already considered, and we developed an agreement, as the city managers mentioned, about a year and a half worth of developing all the parameters with that, with the city attorney, of an agreement for using primary source water as wastewater effluent, and the other, there's several other items in there, system development fee and rates and things like that. So with that, is there any questions?
Yeah, Barry, when you say effluent, I'm assuming this is post-treatment effluent?
Correct. Yeah, this is fully treated water, wastewater that would go back right into the lake.
Okay, so that's one question. The second question would be, I don't know if it's for Vince or maybe for Ed Sell, is this facility going to be taxable?
I would doubt it, again, because their pollution control, if that's a environmental regulatory project, that those are typically not going to be taxable. I'm looking at Mr. Buds for an affirmative, because
We could negotiate that, correct?
I'd want to think about that one a little bit. I mean, the question's going to be, is it pollution control, which they're going to say then is exempt, or is it, part of power generation, which I think is,
but even the pollution control and
Byproduct
some
from
of
their
the
process.
environmental is a function of the production.
I think it would be an interesting negotiation with them, so we get some taxable value from the project, considering that, we're by charging them water and sanitary sewer, it really benefits the partnerships, the water fund, and it benefits the sanitary, the authority. It provides no taxable general fund benefit to the city. So, I'm just wondering, as part of the agreement, that we try to negotiate with DTE on some taxable value for this facility if they're going to be building 3 more of them as part of the project. I mean, even if we got 50% taxable value, it's more than 0.
Yeah. Let us take a look at whether that's an item that, I'll be honest with you, right off the bat, I just seen it as one of those pollution control related projects that have, historically not been subject to taxation. Whether that's feasible or not. But we do think that the sale of the effluent, I mean, it's running into the lake anyways. If there's an alternative use and you get a few nickels for it, it's probably, one, environmentally, probably the right thing to do. And two, you get, as I said, you get something otherwise that you're going to discharge to the lake anyways. So
Well, here's another option. May I explore it, Your Honor? If this is not going to be taxable, then why don't we set up a meter and we buy the effluent from the wastewater and then sell that effluent with a markup to Detroit Edison for their non-taxable property?
let me think about how that we could,
I mean, even if we got a penny a gallon.
yeah.
I mean, it's like we sell water to Dundee wholesale and then they mark it up
Yeah.
to their customers.
Well, we did put a markup on a bit of a markup on the
Yeah.
effluent rate that we already proposed.
Yeah, I mean, if we can't get taxable value, we buy it and then we sell it to them and we mark it up a little bit.
So there might be another question. I have a quick question, and I'll go to Councilman Moore. The infrastructure, is it there? Is it going to have to be built? I was trying to go back and read what was in the proposed agreement here. and if there is extensions or other infrastructure being installed, where's that getting paid for?
So their primary source is wastewater effluent. They would be tapping this 72-inch line, which is in an easement actually on their property. So it's in a great spot for them to make a connection to. So they would just tap that and run that to that holding tank, or it's a forwarding sump, and then we would have the meter right there. The potable water system is also on their side of the road. So they would just tap that and run that to a above ground heated structure for the meter and backflow device. And then everything on their property would be their own infrastructure, hydrants and piping and various things running into their process. So yeah, there's no extensions of the public system at this point, just all private.
Will it require future maintenance on those? From
For them, no public maintenance, other than a meter replacement occasionally.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Councilman Moore?
Thank you, Your Honor. Barry, just quickly, is this going to help in their resale of the fly ash? Because they do resell the fly ash, I mean, as far as I know currently, or they're trying to, they've had some hiccups in that. Is this one of the things that the EPA is requiring that they do in order to be able to just resell the fly ash and transport it?
They were focusing on landfilling or sale. They didn't give any differentiation on the breakdown and how they planned on attacking it. I think it really boils down to the chemistry of it, on whether they can resell it or not for gypsum.
Major reason I ask that is because a lot of that is tonnage that goes out of the port. And that is also taxable by the port, and there's a fee that we charge for that. So I just want to make sure we're not interrupting that portion of it. Or if we can help in some way, maybe make that a part of it.
Some discussion with them related to that and the operation for what can be done other than just landfill. I know Mr. Lamar thinks there's some opportunities in there, and so, and again, it's still not operating or functional, so there may be some time to incorporate that in. But again, as Mr. Leroy indicated, it's still going to be a function of its marketability based on its composition and with the end product.
Well, maybe it's something we can associate with if we want to discuss doing fees with them regarding the effluent water or not.
Yeah, I understand that, that may be cost effective to their end on the just landfilling it, but then there is where it's going, and it also reduces the marketability and revenue for the port if it's not going through the port for future use or productive use. Councilman Felder?
Yes, sir, thank you. Section 5 of the contract discusses the rate basis of the system and says that it's going to be subject to the commodity prices that are approved by council in the budget, the annual budget process, but then it goes on to talk about specific rates within the contract. They wouldn't be locked into those rates. We would retain the authority to change those rates in a rate-based system as we do with any other customer in our system. Is that correct?
Yes, we would review that on an annual basis, like the budget process.
Okay. All right. Do we anticipate the life of this facility, given what DTE has said about the operations at the coal plant down the road? Do we only plan on this facility operating for the next 15 years, 20 years?
I would assume so. I mean, if they're truly planning on having an end date with it, I mean, it's a facility built specific for handling fly ash, that type of product. It's a pug mill, and I mean, unless another process comes in there and utilizes that infrastructure, I would assume so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is on that. I mean, if it's capable of selling, it might also be capable of buying, as it's on the port that can handle that sort of bulk cargo, assuming the screening process figures itself out one of these days. So does this complicate the decommissioning process or strategy of the plant and now this facility in the resulting brownfield that's inevitably down the road?
If I may, Your Honor, I'm not sure how this fits into their long-term plan that's been filed with the Michigan Public Service Commission. I assume that this is probably going to be amortized over the life of the remaining operation for the coal fired aspect of their production. So, whether it's in, I think, 2045 is the end date with the current, but this is complying with a regulatory requirement that they have, so.
I understand that might be part of a larger discussion. I don't know that this is the venue that would be most appropriate to begin discussing that.
Correct.
In the framework that we want to build around how we would like that process to go, but I think that that's an important discussion that at some point needs to occur. 10, 15 years might sound like a lot, but, in municipal government, that's what we plan for, so.
Councilman Felder, I'm assured you're going to be here to help negotiate that 15 years from now.
I'll do what I can, given the opinions of the residents of me at that time.
Other questions for Mr. Leroy? So what's the next steps regarding this? Is there a time frame that this may come back to us? Is it something that's still
Well,
needs discussion?
we got a couple things to follow up on related to the environmental aspect and whether it's taxable or not. And then based on that, we'll report back to council and talk a little bit further with DTE. So we were pretty comfortable going forward with it, given our involvement with it heretofore, but we got to get council comfortable as well. So we'll be back with some additional information.
Okay. Thanks, Barry. Pass to next item.
The next item is Mr. Green going to talk a little bit about the review of our Cdbg CARES Act project and program applications that we received. Again, the CARES Act was a special earmark that we received under the Cdbg program, and there's 3 applications that we've received, although I think we have a meeting tomorrow with MCOP as well. So, Mr. Green.
Members of council, Mr. Pastu, Jeffrey Green, Director of Community Development. I kept asking Barry to kind of stretch out his presentation more and more. He didn't do that. But actually, I'm going to ask Caitlin Pierce, the CDBG coordinator for the department, if she would like to come up and explain some of this and the application, a little bit about the CDBG funding and the COVID CARES Act. So Caitlin, if you wouldn't mind coming up, and I'm going to turn the podium over to her. She knows much more about it than I do.
Mayor, Council. In April of 2020, the CARES Act was instituted, and we were eligible for rounds 1 and 3 of funding, totaling $374,611. Our first round came with our submission of our 2021 annual action plan, and our second round was just received this August. Currently, we have the money allocated to go towards rental assistance and public services, including supplies, utility assistance, support for shelters, and other COVID-19 related costs. In order to be eligible for CARES funding, activities must directly correlate to COVID-19 and be used to prepare, prevent, or respond to COVID-19. Oaks of Righteousness has submitted 3 applications totaling $110,000. Projects over there have included a bathroom remodel to include a new HVAC system, PPE and increased staffing costs during the shelter in place, and the opening of the store in the neighborhood. So that is where we are at. Currently, we have those applications. We do have a meeting with MCOP tomorrow about how to go about the rental assistance and the best way to get the money into the residents' hands. If there's any questions, I would be happy to answer.
If I may, Your Honor, just
Yes.
to carry it a little bit further, this is probably obviously the first time we've had this CARES Act come before council. I fumbled around a little bit, not sure exactly how to do it, so I thought, okay, let's present it to City Council and And before we proceed with any action, as Caitlin said, it was referenced in our action plan that was adopted and accepted by HUD as well. So I thought, let's present it to council, and then if there's no questions from council, we'll go back and put it back at the next meeting for approval for the.
Is there a time frame for the CARES Act? I know things are ongoing. There's a lot of different funds coming from the federal government for specific purpose and use. Want to make sure we match all those. But on this particular program, do they have a time frame?
So in this, I haven't seen anything in writing. In the webinars, they've been thrown out December of 22 as kind of a deadline to get all of the funds spent. I keep checking. I was looking today, seeing if there was anything definitive yet that I could find, and I haven't yet. So I'm just kind of putting that December 22 on the list for now.
Councilman Michelangelo?
Yeah, thank you, Your Honor. What are the eligible expenses that can be used towards the CARES Act, the CDBG CARES Act?
So they have to be able to tie back directly to COVID. A lot of the examples include public assistance. It can't be anything that we currently fund. It has to be something new or an improved service. And they tie back directly to COVID. So it's rental assistance, public services, food shelters, emergency homeless shelters. Just as long as we can show that correlation.
Does it have to be places that are within the city?
It has to serve city residents.
Okay.
Yep, that is our stipulation. They can be outside, but the money has to only serve residents of the city.
Defined, I mean, because it's served to the community, but is that further defined or?
Yep, so for one of the examples, our legal services, they're located outside of the city, but they help the city residents with foreclosure and eviction. So we just have to be able to tie that they were a city resident or currently are, like if an example of a time of homelessness, that they were a city resident before they were homeless, or they're getting services but live within the city limits.
Okay. Councilman Vining?
You mentioned Oaks of Righteousness put in applications for these funds. Did you have any other applications submitted?
No, those were the only applications. I guess we have been in talk with MCOP, but those were the only outside applications that we've received.
Go ahead, Mr. Green, because I was thinking about the application process, how that was, I mean, there's so many federal programs that are going on right now. The CARES Acts, I think we've all heard of. We know that some of the funding where it's for, but is it something that they published to make sure that it's there? But also, obviously it did because we have applications, which is good, which is a good thing.
And we've tried to get some of that information out. I was simply going to say with regard to MCOP and with the rental assistance, one of the reasons we're looking to MCOP is they already have that mechanism set up to take in those funds and potentially distribute those funds. But also, again, Oaks of Righteousness is one of those organizations that that provides a lot of the services that we don't provide, but it does provide a public service. And just getting back to how do we determine that it provides service to city residents. One of the things that we do with, for example, food distribution with the regular CDBG program is when those foods are distributed at the various locations, they do take down names and ask where they live in order that we can document that it is going primarily to persons within the city. And again, that happens at the Oaks of Righteousness is one of those locations, although it's not the Oaks that's providing it, but rather another organization. So yeah, we're trying to get that information out, but you know, again, it's we think that we have some viable options here to address and use that money that we have allocated. So
I did see that in the applications. I think there's it was recognized there's some process. I said documentation records, which would answer the question now they have think it through that about that. I think about it because we want to make sure, one, we are servicing, and there's needs that come from everywhere, and the needs that come here from residents that are currently here. Residents might be, find their way here as well and establish themselves and need assistance. I just, as we do reporting back, I just making sure we have the information to be able to, obviously be available for funding in the future and continue to support the items that were listed here. I mean, there are items that can be served in our community through this program, the items that are listed, what it says it's they qualify for.
Yes.
Shelter, homeless, and then the rental assistance, which you already talked about.
Your Honor.
Yeah, Councilman
Jeff,
College.
I went through the applications. I guess what's the next steps? Is your office, your department going to evaluate the applications and the discussions with MCOP and put together how the budget is going to be used and then come back to council for approval?
My assumption is that would be the process, once we have a little better idea. And I know, and I'll probably ask Caitlin to come back up and talk a little bit about that, but we have been talking with the Oaks of Righteousness. They submitted early on, and we've been trying to get through this process and kind of figure this all out while we're doing all of our other CDBG reporting, our CAPER and all those kind of things. It's a continual process that goes on throughout the year. But Caitlin, if you have some info on the applications and processing and how we're going to go next.
Okay, so for the applications, we did allocate in the annual action plan that we were allocating 50% towards rental assistance and 50% for public services. We can go in and amend that plan very easily if we do see that there's a need one way more than the other. Once we go through the applications, we check them for eligibility, perform the environmental reviews. They would come back for approval in front of council, putting together kind of the budget of what the COVID cares funds would go for.
Okay. So you guys, there's a little bit more work that has to be done yet. Okay.
Other questions? Looking through the application, I had one question, and I think it was, the village market, which I know is, obviously there's no question when we talk about a food desert and the definition of what that means, access to food and ability, and I think that the Oaks of course, with the village market has started to provide those, and I think there's many avenues which that can go to be a great resource. One of the items that I think it does qualify from a COVID aspect because it was difficult to get to locations. And I know one of the items that was referenced in the, what the province does, the activity or project address, and it says, of course, being a food desert and location within Monroe County. When we talk about the transportation, I think transportation is a struggle and is a challenge for a variety of reasons. But as I read through, it says access to local grocery store due to the local bus system being shut down due to COVID-19 restrictions. I guess I'd want to verify that they were shut down. I know there was some restriction. I know there's some changes. I know there's some route items. But I would think that the fact that we have a millage that's passed by the residents for services of LET, the shutdown part, I think maybe it's restricted, but I don't know what changes there were. I know there was some changes of routes, and it might have directly affected to where it was more challenged to get to. I think it still qualifies in my mind because not everybody can get to where maybe the bus was at, or maybe the ability that they don't have other services, and I understand that completely. I wouldn't want to have a problem later that says, well, if it was shut down, why do we have a millage that we're paying? I think there were adjustments. So there's just something that maybe that you could check with LET and on that. I think it's, I understand the point that's being made, and I do believe there was impact with the services, but I just think how we word it is always important too.
And I will definitely look into kind of what their regulations were during that time and what they were running.
Yeah, and I think that's important to have. But I also see in here where it says, they don't have, obviously the ability to purchase, process, or price foods and just the other locations that maybe don't provide those services, and you have to go to a regular grocery store, and it's a challenge to get there one way or another. Okay?
Okay.
I'm good.
Councilman Varney?
I understand, Mr. Mayor's point about checking into that, but, I did want to say, even if, they are up and running, LEC, they changed a lot of their rules to where you can only carry like 2 bags on the bus. And then there's like, 40 minutes waits between each, bus. And if you live far east, as I do, you might have to catch 2 or 3 buses just to get to the grocery store. That's gonna take you like an hour and a half. I'm just talking about the drive time.
Right.
With all the stops and everything to do a round trip. So, yeah, there are a lot of restrictions. And they've even changed a lot of their, routes, which I never thought about that. We did just get a millage, and they've reduced a lot of the routes and made a lot of changes. So I'd be interested in knowing about those changes as well.
Yeah, that's kind of my point of bringing up is that if there's an operational change, then I think that would be more appropriate to be then shut down. But I understand it's shutting out the opportunities for some people by the changes. And I think that's a little different. 'Cause I wouldn't want to think that we're not running the bus, because we are. But where and how, if there's been some operational changes, as Councilman, as you say, or route changes, or that's kind of what I'm looking for, because I think there were some restrictions, and Councilman, the point you made, I think is Councilman is right there when regarding, what a person can bring on. I know there's many that have the pull carts and trying to get that on the bus, and it caused some logistic issues, and it was related to COVID, because they were also, I won't say limiting who could ride the bus, but they had space needs that they had to be safe as well to continue to operate, both not only for the employees and the drivers, but the people that are getting on the bus. And so I think it's all tied together, and I think there's a way to actually, I would say, even emphasize or state that why it was critical. And there's no question, I believe it is, but I just think that how it's worded, it would be helpful to point all the things out the councilman said and some of my thoughts as I think it through. But, if we start and say, well, what were the operational adjustments? And that might be something as a follow-up with Mr. Pastou as well. I know that he had talked about having to get a hold of the director there on a variety of things. So these are good. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Any other questions for Caitlin or Jeff?
All set, thanks.
No, I look forward to maybe Vince this coming back so we can move forward, even though we're having conversations. The items that are presented do fit, at least as I look at these and read these, fits the criteria for the CARES fund, and we have the other one yet to have conversation with. But the plan states how we would divide when we pass that plan about the funding aspect. So I think look forward to seeing this come back. Yep. Great. All right.
Thank you.
It must be, hold on, Jeff. Oh, you can, I'm sorry, not you, Jeff. I thought you were going to come up. Comment on the CARES?
Yes.
Name, just step up.
Oaths of Righteousness, so 924 East 2nd Street. So I know that there were some, as far as you were asking about the bus, the routes. So I know that there were some routes shut down, which affected our community. And as far as the CARES money, what happened is the city was being audited by HUD. And so in the audit with HUD, we had to have conversations with HUD. And in us having those conversations about what we were being provided, what services we provided, they told us about the COVID money and they asked us to apply for it. So we actually put in these applications. I don't know what's the date. Is it April, May?
It's been a while.
Right. And so from my understanding, because all of our work has been done. So we submitted all of our paperwork. We submitted everything. And Caitlin had told me environmental studies were being done on the stuff for Oaks. So as I said, because HUD is the one who contacted us about this and this money and about our services and that we should qualify for the HUD money. And so that was kind of where we were. And the fact that we weren't getting any CDBG money as is. And so Sandy is our nurse. So just the whole thing with the bathrooms, the HVAC system. So she was just going to talk about that. But I guess, really no need for that because we understand, when we started, we were just a warming shelter. And so, of course, we didn't have all the shower facilities and whatnot. And enough sinks for people. So hand washing, we know how important all of that stuff is to COVID. So that was a big part. And then as far as the food desert, because what happened was the fire department shut down the old Mianos, which was this, used to be a wonderful meat market and all this stuff, but they shut them down for a little bit. And then they stopped them from carrying, they no longer carry fresh meat nor produce. And so with that, our free clinic, we found that the number one barrier the number one issue in our community is food related.
Right.
And so we wanted people to have access to fresh food, healthy food, things that were not just high in sodium. And so that was kind of the vision behind the market. And I know, Mary, you've been there, and a couple of you other people have been down to see the market. So it's just exciting process. And so we're excited for what we're doing in the community and moving forward. And we've got some exciting things we want to do.
I think, okay, I'll wait.
Just because I'm here, Sandy Lipsdorf, and I just wanted to talk about it from the medical standpoint. When we started our clinic, Sacred Oaks, which we run in collaboration with ProMedica Residency Center, and even before that, when I would do screenings for people, I noticed that, blood pressure, diabetes, all food-related conditions are so prevalent. I worked at the hospital for 40 years, and I saw things that I never saw in the hospital. I saw blood pressures higher than anybody's I ever took in the hospital. And we began to realize that these were food-related issues because the people down here in poverty are eating highly processed, high sodium, high carbohydrate, high calories. Obesity is rampant, in people in poverty. So when Dr. Husselman decided to come and work with us, we were able to then at least help treat these people. We were able to get them prescriptions and help them. We've been trying to do some nutrition education, but when COVID hit, we noticed all of a sudden we were giving out 4 or 5 times as many food boxes as we were giving. It was just, every place shut down. People couldn't get food. As far as the bus goes, I'm not sure exactly how much they shut down during the actual shutdown period. But I know that after that, when they opened back up, they were allowing 10 people on a bus. So I have 3 children. So say I lived, my children were young and I lived there, and I had to take all 3 of my children on the bus, which would be hard. It's $2 a person. People in poverty often don't have $8 to ride the bus. They were only allowed to bring on enough groceries to fit under their seat. So to feed your 3 children something healthy, you would have to have $8 to go to the store at least every other day because you can only bring 2 bags. So literally there are children down there that are growing up on ramen noodles and Kool-Aid. So the cycle is just going on and on. So now that is when Pastor decided she's got to get this grocery store open because COVID restricted things even more. And so now, they have access to fresh foods and vegetables. They have access to meat. That's one of the popular items down there. So they have access. Now, whether they choose to use it, that's an individual decision. But to not have access is a terrible thing. Also, as far as our staffing, we literally had to double our staffing at the shelter because our people had to go out, most of them during the day. So we had minimal staffing, but with COVID, we couldn't, and we didn't want people just, homeless people sometimes tend to just run around town, and we didn't want them exposing themselves. Libraries were closed, and so we didn't want them to get COVID. We also didn't want them to bring COVID into the shelter, so we had to do a lot to protect our people. So we basically had to double our staffing, and we've not gone back to the point where we're asking people to leave. They're still there. Our staffing is still doubled. Our staff did not want the shelter people riding the bus because they didn't want them exposed on the bus. So the shelter staff now had to drive people to their appointments or to their jobs if they had one. So the expenses related to COVID have just really blossomed.
I think we understand, and I think the applications speak to the items. My question was not to delay this or not to, but to make sure that we're submitting, I think there's restrictions and changes. It's different than shutting down, because if we shut down, then we have to answer to other people and say, well, why did we pay up a millage then? That was my purpose for bringing that up. It's just to make sure we're submitting, because I think these are going to move forward, but we want to make sure that somebody else may look at it and say, well, what does this mean? So I appreciate the information.
I just
think, I
wanted
think all
to-
the items are important that you spoke about.
I'm not here very often, and as a nurse, I just wanted to, speak to some of the issues, the health issues that we were addressing from COVID. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I would just love to invite anybody out, because I know, Mr. Mayor, you were going to meet me one day for the daycare center. We've opened up a free daycare center. We have a free medical clinic. We have, our grocery store. And so I know many of you have come down to the grocery store, but if anybody has time, stop by.
All right, thank you much.
You're welcome.
All right. Mr. Pastu, first I'll see if the council
Let me
has
just
any other
I'm
comments.
sorry.
If not, Vince?
No, I'm going to, if I may, these applications, Mr. Green and Ms. Pierce brought them to me at least a couple of months ago, and I finally said, I got to get this off my desk, and that's how it ended up here. So I know I've had it for a bit. So there's a lot of validity to what was said about turning them in earlier. So
Yeah, for me, it's just it's a quick reference to make sure that we're, that we have the information needed. I think the information provided in the applications and the discussion are the criteria which care funds are for. Now we just see if we can move it forward. Look forward to coming to maybe the next meeting. It'd be great. Vince, other items?
I have nothing else for the work session, Your Honor.
Okay, so with that, I guess we need a motion to adjourn the special meeting. We'll come back in our regular meeting here shortly.
The special meeting.
Motion by Councilman LaWar, supported by Councilman Viney to adjourn. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilperson Vining?
Yes.
Lamore?
Yes.
Felder?
Yes.
Whitman?
Yes.
Echoangeli?
Yes.
Mayor Clark?
Yes.